Elena Martinez adjusted her navy blue dress for the 100th time, watching as couples swayed across the marble dance floor of the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the celebration, but she felt cold sitting at table 12, the dreaded singles table tucked away in the corner like an afterthought. Her cousin Maria's wedding was everything Elena had dreamed her own would be someday. White roses cascaded from towering centerpieces, and the 5-tier cake stood like a monument to love and commitment. But at 28, Elena found herself watching from the sidelines once again, nursing a glass of champagne that had long since lost its fizz. The invitation had clearly stated +1, but Elena's boyfriend of 2 years had conveniently remembered a work emergency the morning of the wedding. She suspected the real emergency was his reluctance to meet her family, especially after she'd mentioned her father's protective nature and her 3 older brothers who worked in construction. "Another family gathering, another reminder that I'm the only Martinez woman without a ring," Elena muttered under her breath, watching her teenage cousin dance with her new husband. Even 17-year-old Sophia had brought a date, leaving Elena as the sole occupant of what her grandmother called the Lonely Hearts Club. The other seats at her table remained empty. The wedding planner had clearly run out of single relatives to place there, leaving Elena with a perfect view of everyone else's happiness. She watched her parents dance, still moving together like they had during their own wedding 30 years ago. Her father whispered something in her mother's ear that made her laugh, the same laugh that had filled their house throughout Elena's childhood. A waiter appeared beside her table, his tray laden with fresh glasses of champagne. "Another drink, miss?" he asked with practiced politeness, noticing her empty glass. "Why not?" Elena replied, trading her glass for a full one. "It's not like I have anywhere else to be." As the evening progressed, Elena found herself becoming increasingly aware of the pitying glances from relatives. Aunt Carmen had already approached twice to mention her neighbor's single son, a podiatrist with very nice hands and his own dental practice. Cousin Roberto's wife kept sending meaningful looks her way whenever she passed with her own handsome husband in tow. The band struck up a slow song, and Elena watched as practically every guest found their way to the dance floor. Even her 80-year-old grandfather was shuffling slowly with her grandmother, their hands intertwined despite 5 decades of marriage. The sight should have been heartwarming, but it only emphasized Elena's isolation. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through social media to distract herself from the romantic scene unfolding before her. Her Instagram feed was filled with engagement announcements, baby photos, and vacation pictures of happy couples. She quickly closed the app, feeling even more alone than before. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Elena looked up to find a man standing beside one of the empty chairs at her table. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair that looked expensively styled and a black suit that clearly wasn't rented from a chain store. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, and when he smiled, she noticed a small scar near his left temple that somehow made him more interesting rather than less. "Actually, this whole table is pretty much abandoned," Elena replied, gesturing to the empty chairs around her. "I'm Elena, the bride's cousin, and apparently the family's official spinster." The man laughed, a rich sound that seemed genuine rather than polite. "Marco," he said, extending his hand. "And I seriously doubt you're a spinster. More likely, the men in this city lack proper judgment." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks at the compliment. Up close, Marco was even more striking than she'd first noticed. His handshake was firm but gentle, and he moved with the kind of confidence that suggested he was accustomed to being in control of situations. "So what brings you to table 12? The island of misfit toys?" Elena asked as Marco settled into the chair beside her. "Did you also get abandoned by your date at the last minute?" Marco's expression grew slightly serious. "Something like that," he said, then brightened. But maybe that was fortunate. Otherwise, I wouldn't have met the most beautiful woman at this wedding. Elena nearly choked on her champagne. It had been months since anyone had flirted with her so directly, and she found herself responding despite her earlier disappointment. That's quite a line. Do you use it often? Only when it's true, Marco replied, his eyes holding hers. And only when I meet someone who looks like she needs rescuing from a very boring evening. As if on cue, the band launched into a particularly energetic song, and the dance floor filled with guests attempting moves that probably looked better in their heads. Elena watched her Uncle Antonio trying to recreate moves from his college days, nearly taking out 2 other couples in the process. Well, you're not wrong about the boring part, Elena admitted. I've been watching other people have fun for the past 2 hours. I'm starting to feel like a wedding anthropologist, studying the mating rituals of the happily coupled. Marco laughed again. That's a very scientific approach to a family celebration. What conclusions have you drawn from your research? Elena considered the question seriously. That champagne makes everyone think they're better dancers than they actually are. That wedding cake is apparently worth fighting over, and that being single at a wedding is like having a contagious disease that everyone wants to cure with unsolicited matchmaking advice. Sounds like you need better company, Marco said, standing and extending his hand toward her. Care to join me for some actual fun instead of observing it from a distance? Elena hesitated for a moment. She didn't know anything about this man beyond his name and the fact that he wore expensive suits. But the alternative was sitting alone while her relatives continued their well-meaning but unwanted attempts to set her up with every unmarried man they'd ever met. I should warn you, she said, taking his hand and standing. I'm not exactly known for my dancing skills. I once stepped on my prom date's foot so hard he needed ice. I'll take that risk, Marco replied, leading her toward the dance floor. Besides, I have very durable shoes. The band was playing a classic Italian love song that Elena's grandmother had sung to her as a child. As Marco pulled her into his arms, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the flutter of genuine attraction mixed with possibility. He moved with surprising grace, leading her confidently through steps she didn't even know she knew. You lied about not being able to dance, Marco murmured near her ear as they swayed together. Either that or you're a very quick learner. Maybe you're just a good teacher, Elena replied, surprised by her own boldness. The champagne was definitely helping, but there was something about Marco that made her feel more confident, more interesting than she had in a long time. As the song ended, Marco didn't immediately release her. Instead, he looked down at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. Elena, he said quietly, what would you say if I told you this evening doesn't have to end with you going home alone? Before Elena could respond, the lights dimmed, and the band announced the last dance of the evening. Around them, couples drew closer together, lost in their own romantic bubbles. Elena felt as though she was standing at the edge of something important, a moment that could change everything if she was brave enough to step forward. What exactly are you proposing? She asked, her voice barely audible over the music. Marco's smile was mysterious. Almost dangerous in a way that should have concerned her, but instead made her pulse quicken. I'm proposing that you let me show you how the other half lives, even if it's just for tonight. No more watching from the sidelines, no more being the observer instead of the participant. The song began, and Elena found herself moving closer to Marco without conscious decision. Whatever he was offering, it felt like exactly what she needed. A chance to be someone different, someone who didn't always play it safe and end up alone at family gatherings. All right, she whispered, surprising herself with the decision. But I should probably mention that I have 3 overprotective brothers and a father who owns several firearms. Marco's laugh was low and appreciative. Noted, but somehow, I don't think that's going to be a problem. As they danced, Elena caught sight of her parents watching from their table. Her mother looked pleased to see her daughter finally dancing with someone, while her father wore his usual suspicious expression, reserved for any man who showed interest in his daughters. Elena gave them a small wave, then turned her attention back to Marco. "So, what do you do?" she asked, realizing she knew nothing about this mysterious man who had transformed her evening from pathetic to promising. "I'm in business," Marco replied vaguely. "Import and export mostly. Family business, you could say." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Elena found herself not wanting to ask too many questions. For once in her carefully planned life, she wanted to embrace the mystery, to let herself be swept away by possibility rather than practicality. The song ended, and the lights came up slightly as guests began to gather their belongings and say their goodbyes. Elena realized the evening was coming to an end, and with it, perhaps her chance to discover what Marco's offer really meant. "So," she said, suddenly feeling nervous. "What happens now?" Marco reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card. "This is my private number," he said, pressing it into her palm. "Call me tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock exactly. I'll send a car for you." "A car?" Elena looked at the card, which was expensive paper with only a name and phone number embossed in silver. No business name, no address. "That sounds very mysterious." "The best evenings usually are," Marco replied. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and thrilling. "Until tomorrow, Elena Martinez. Sweet dreams." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Elena standing on the dance floor with nothing but a business card and a dozen questions. She watched him disappear into the crowd of departing guests, noting how other people seemed to step aside for him without being asked, how the valet appeared immediately when he approached the exit. "Elena, there you are!" Her cousin Maria appeared beside her, still radiant in her wedding dress despite the long evening. "I saw you dancing with that gorgeous man. Who was he? How did you meet him?" Elena looked down at the business card in her hand, then back toward the exit where Marco had vanished. "I'm honestly not sure," she admitted, "but I think I'm about to find out." As she collected her purse and said goodbye to relatives, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken an unexpected turn. Tomorrow evening felt both thrilling and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and being asked to jump. For the first time in years, Elena Martinez was ready to take that leap. Elena stared at the black business card for the 15th time that day, running her thumb over the embossed silver letters that spelled Marco Benedetti. She had Googled the name that morning but found only vague references to import businesses and a few society page photos showing a man who might have been Marco at charity events. 7 o'clock was approaching fast, and Elena still wasn't sure if she would actually make the call. She had changed clothes 3 times, settling on a black cocktail dress that made her feel confident without trying too hard. Her roommate Jessica had spent the afternoon speculating about Marco's identity, ranging from theories about him being a foreign diplomat to suggestions that he might be involved in something illegal. "You know nothing about this guy except that he's gorgeous and mysterious," Jessica said from the doorway of Elena's bedroom. "That could mean he's a romantic billionaire. Or it could mean he's a serial killer with good taste in suits." "Thank you for that encouraging assessment," Elena replied, checking her reflection one more time. "But something tells me he's not a serial killer. Serial killers probably don't crash weddings to dance with lonely bridesmaids." "Cousin of the bride?" "Not bridesmaid," Jessica corrected. "And how do you know he crashed the wedding? Maybe he was invited." Elena paused, realizing she had never actually asked Marco how he knew Maria or why he was at the wedding. The omissions seemed glaring now, but last night she had been too caught up in the unexpected romance of the situation to ask practical questions. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Dad wants to know about the young man you were dancing with last night." "He seemed very intense." Elena groaned. She loved her family, but their protective instincts could be overwhelming. Her father had probably already run a background check on every guest at the wedding, trying to identify the mysterious Marco who had captured his daughter's attention. At exactly 7 o'clock, Elena dialed the number on the card. Marco answered on the second ring, his voice warm and pleased. "Elena, I was hoping you would call." "I almost didn't," she admitted honestly. "My friends think I'm crazy for agreeing to this without knowing more about you." "Smart friends," Marco replied, "but sometimes the best experiences come from taking calculated risks. Are you ready for an adventure?" "Define adventure," Elena said, walking to her window and looking down at the street below. A sleek black sedan was already waiting at the curb, its engine purring quietly. "Look outside," Marco said softly. Elena's breath caught. "You're already here? How did you know I would call?" "Because you're braver than you think you are," Marco replied, "and because some connections are inevitable. The car is waiting whenever you're ready." Elena grabbed her purse and jacket, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. As she approached the sedan, the driver stepped out and opened the rear door for her. He was a large man with kind eyes who nodded respectfully as she slid into the leather interior. The car was luxurious in a way that suggested money, real money. The seats were butter-soft leather, and there was a small refrigerator stocked with water and champagne. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers, and the windows were tinted dark enough that she couldn't see out clearly. "Where are we going?" Elena asked the driver, but he simply smiled and said, "Mr. Benedetti will explain everything when we arrive, miss." The drive took them through parts of the city Elena rarely visited, past expensive boutiques and restaurants where reservations were impossible to get. They pulled up in front of a building she recognized from magazine articles, an exclusive private club that catered to the city's elite, the kind of place where membership was inherited rather than purchased. Marco was waiting for her at the entrance, and Elena's breath caught again at the sight of him. He wore a charcoal gray suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for his frame, and his hair was perfectly styled without looking artificial. When he smiled at her, she felt that same flutter of attraction from the night before. "You look stunning," he said, offering his arm as they walked toward the entrance. "I hope you're hungry. I've arranged something special." The interior of the club was all dark wood and crystal, with oil paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum. Staff members nodded deferentially to Marco as they passed, and Elena noticed that other patrons watched them with curiosity and what looked like respect tinged with caution. Marco led her to a private dining room where a table was set for two, with more silverware than Elena had ever seen in one place. Candles provided the only light, creating an intimate atmosphere that made the space feel separate from the rest of the world. "This is incredible," Elena said as Marco held her chair. "But I have to ask, how exactly do you afford this? Last night you mentioned import and export, but this seems like more than that." Marco poured wine from a bottle that Elena suspected cost more than her monthly rent. "My family has been in business for several generations," he said carefully. "We've been fortunate enough to build something substantial." "What kind of business?" Elena pressed, accepting the wine glass he offered. Marco was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the candlelight. "The kind that requires discretion," he said finally, "the kind where trust is the most valuable currency." Elena felt a shiver that wasn't entirely unpleasant. There was something thrilling about Marco's mysterious nature, even as her practical side warned her to be careful. "Should I be worried?" she asked. "About your safety?" "Never," Marco replied immediately. "I would never let any harm come to you, Elena. But I won't lie to you. My world is complicated. If you choose to be part of it, even temporarily, there are things you would need to understand and accept." Before Elena could respond, waiters appeared with the first course of what turned out to be the most elaborate meal of her life. Each dish was a work of art, and Marco seemed to know exactly what wine paired with each course. He asked thoughtful questions about her life, her work as a graphic designer, her dreams of opening her own studio someday. "What's stopping you?" Marco asked, as they shared a dessert that looked too beautiful to eat. "From opening the studio, I mean." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Reality. Starting a business takes capital I don't have, connections I haven't made, and a level of confidence I'm still working on. It's not like I can just snap my fingers and make it happen." "What if you could?" Marco asked seriously. "What if someone believed in your talent enough to invest in your dreams?" "Hypothetically?" Elena met his gaze. "I suppose I would be very grateful and very suspicious of their motives." Marco smiled. "Smart and beautiful. I'm increasingly impressed with your cousin's taste in family members." "About that," Elena said, seizing the opening. "How do you know Maria? I never saw you at any of the pre-wedding events, and I've been to every family gathering for the past 6 months." Marco's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "I know the groom's family through business connections. I was invited as a courtesy, but I almost didn't attend. I'm glad I changed my mind." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Elena found herself not wanting to push. The evening had been perfect so far, and she wasn't ready for reality to intrude on whatever fantasy she was living. After dinner, Marco led her to the club's rooftop terrace, which offered a stunning view of the city lights. They stood at the railing, and Elena felt the warmth of Marco's body beside her as a cool breeze stirred her hair. "Elena," Marco said quietly, "I want to be honest with you about something." Elena's stomach tightened. "That sounds ominous." "My life is not ordinary," Marco continued. "The business my family is in, it comes with certain obligations, expectations. There are people who depend on me to make decisions that affect their livelihoods, their families." "You make it sound like you're running the Mafia," Elena said jokingly, then stopped when she saw Marco's expression. "Oh my God, you're serious." Marco turned to face her fully. "Not the Mafia as you might imagine it from movies. But yes, my family's business operates in areas where traditional rules don't always apply. We provide services that others can't or won't provide. We protect people who need protection." Elena felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "What exactly are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that I'm not a normal businessman, and if you choose to see me again, you need to understand what that means. It means there will be parts of my life I can't share with you, at least not immediately. It means that being with me could put you in situations that are intense." Elena stared out at the city lights, her mind racing. Every rational thought told her to thank Marco for a lovely evening and never see him again. But when she looked at him, she felt something she had never experienced before, a pull toward danger that was stronger than her instinct for safety. "Define intense," she said finally. Marco's relief was visible. "It means that sometimes I have to make difficult decisions quickly. It means that some people might try to use you to get to me. It means that if you're with me, you'll need to trust me completely, even when you don't understand what's happening." "And in return?" Elena asked. "In return, I will protect you with my life. I will give you experiences you never imagined possible. I will support your dreams in ways that go beyond money." Marco stepped closer, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek. "And I will show you what it feels like to be cherished by someone who understands exactly how rare and precious you are." Elena leaned into his touch, feeling as though she was standing at the edge of a cliff again. But this time, she wasn't afraid of falling. "This is crazy," she whispered. "The best things usually are," Marco replied, echoing his words from the night before. When Marco kissed her, Elena felt as though fireworks were going off in her chest. It was gentle but insistent, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, she knew she had already made her choice. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now, I take you home," Marco said, "and tomorrow, if you're willing, I show you more of my world. But Elena, once you take that step, there's no going back to who you were before. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Elena thought about her quiet life, her predictable routine, the endless series of family gatherings where she sat alone while everyone else paired off. Then she looked at Marco, at the intensity in his eyes and the promise of adventure in his smile. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. The drive back to her apartment was filled with comfortable silence, Marco's hand holding hers as the city passed by outside the tinted windows. When they arrived, he walked her to her door like a perfect gentleman, but the kiss goodnight was anything but innocent. "Tomorrow night," Marco said against her lips. "Where's something you can move in? And Elena? Don't tell anyone about tonight. Not yet. Some secrets are safer kept until the right time." Elena nodded, already missing him before he'd even left. As she watched the sedan disappear into the night, she realized that her old life felt like something that had happened to someone else. Whatever tomorrow brought, she was ready to face it. Inside her apartment, Jessica was waiting with a cup of tea and a dozen questions. But for the first time in her life, Elena kept her secrets to herself, simply smiling and saying, "I'll tell you about it later." As she lay in bed that night, Elena stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had gotten herself into. But beneath the uncertainty was a thrill of anticipation that made sleep impossible. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Elena spent the entire next day in a state of nervous anticipation, checking her phone every few minutes and changing her outfit twice before settling on dark jeans, boots, and a leather jacket that made her feel more confident than she actually was. Marco had said to wear something she could move in, which suggested the evening might involve more than dinner and conversation. At exactly 6 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a message from Marco. "Different car tonight. Look for the blue BMW. Driver's name is Tony. Trust him like you trust me." Elena looked out her window to see a midnight blue BMW waiting at the curb. The driver who got out to open her door was younger than the previous night's chauffeur, with an easy smile and the kind of alertness that suggested he was more than just a driver. "Evening, Miss Martinez," Tony said as she approached. "Marco asked me to take good care of you tonight." "Where are we going?" Elena asked as she settled into the passenger seat. Unlike the sedan from the night before, this car felt more like a high-end sports car than a luxury vehicle. "Somewhere you can see what Marco's world really looks like," Tony replied, pulling smoothly into traffic. "Don't worry, though. Tonight's just about showing you the business side of things. Nothing dangerous." Elena wasn't sure if that was reassuring or disappointing. Part of her was terrified of what she might discover about Marco, but another part was thrilled by the possibility of adventure beyond her ordinary life. They drove to a warehouse district Elena had never visited, pulling up to a building that looked abandoned from the outside. But when Tony led her through a side entrance, Elena discovered that appearances could be deceiving. The interior had been converted into something that looked like a combination of a high-end office and a sophisticated operations center. Men in expensive suits moved purposefully through the space, talking in low voices and checking phones constantly. Elena noticed that several of them were armed, the bulge of shoulder holsters visible beneath their jackets. The atmosphere was charged with an energy she couldn't quite identify. Not dangerous exactly, but definitely intense. Marco appeared from a glass-walled office, and Elena's breath caught as it did every time she saw him. Tonight he wore a black sweater and dark pants, looking more casual but somehow even more commanding than he had in his formal suits. "Elena," he said, moving toward her with that predatory grace she was beginning to recognize. "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't what you expected." "I'm not sure what I expected," Elena admitted, looking around at the organized chaos surrounding them. "What exactly is this place?" "This is where we coordinate our operations," Marco explained, his hand settling at the small of her back as he guided her toward his office. "Import and export, as I mentioned, but also security services, conflict resolution, and protection for people who need it." Inside Marco's office, Elena could see monitors displaying what looked like security feeds from various locations around the city. Maps covered one wall, marked with pins and notes she couldn't read from a distance. It was clearly the nerve center of a sophisticated operation. "Conflict resolution?" Elena asked, settling into a chair across from Marco's desk. "Sometimes people have disagreements that can't be settled through conventional means," Marco said carefully. "We help facilitate solutions that work for everyone involved." Elena was beginning to understand that Marco's explanations were deliberately vague, but she could read between the lines. "You mean you help solve problems that the police can't or won't handle?" "Something like that," Marco confirmed. "Elena, I want you to understand what you're potentially getting involved with. My family doesn't just run a business. We provide stability in an unstable world. We protect our community when the system fails them." Before Elena could respond, Tony appeared in the doorway. "Marco, we need you in the main room. The Romano situation." Marco's expression immediately became more serious. "Give me 2 minutes," he told Tony, then turned back to Elena. "I need to handle something. You can wait here, or Tony can take you home if you'd prefer." Elena felt a surge of determination. "I want to see what you do. If I'm going to be part of your life, I need to understand all of it." Marco studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay close to me. Don't speak unless I ask you a direct question. And Elena, no matter what you hear, remember that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look like what you expect." The main room had been rearranged while they were talking, with chairs arranged in a circle like a conference room. An older man Elena didn't recognize sat in the center, flanked by 2 of Marco's associates. The man looked nervous, but not afraid, which Elena found oddly comforting. "Mr. Romano," Marco said, taking a seat across from the older man. "Thank you for coming. I understand you've been having problems with the Castellano family." Elena realized she was witnessing some kind of mediation session. Mr. Romano began explaining his situation. A dispute over territory for his food truck business that had escalated when competitors started vandalizing his equipment and threatening his employees. "The police say it's a civil matter," Romano said, his frustration evident. "But these people, they don't understand civil. They understand only intimidation." Marco listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Elena found herself impressed by his thoughtful approach and the respect the other men showed him despite his relatively young age. "Here's what we're going to do," Marco said finally. "Tony will have a conversation with the Castellano organization tomorrow morning. We'll explain that Mr. Romano is under our protection now and that any further interference with his business will be taken as a personal insult." "What if they don't listen?" Romano asked. "They'll listen," one of Marco's associates said quietly. "Everyone listens to Marco." Elena felt a chill at the certainty in the man's voice, but also a strange pride in Marco's obvious authority and respect among these men. After Romano left with grateful handshakes all around, Marco led Elena back to his office. "Questions?" he asked, pouring 2 glasses of wine from a bottle that had appeared while they were gone. "Is it always that civilized?" Elena asked. "Usually," Marco replied. Most problems can be solved with the right conversation and the promise of appropriate consequences. People want to be reasonable when they understand their options clearly. And when they don't want to be reasonable, Marco's expression grew more serious. Then we escalate as necessary. But Elena, I want you to understand something. We don't create problems, we solve them. We don't target innocent people, we protect them. What we do exists, because sometimes the system fails people like Mr. Romano. Elena sipped her wine, processing everything she had witnessed. So you're like alternative law enforcement? We're like family, Marco corrected. We take care of our own, and we take care of people who need our help. In return, we ask for loyalty and discretion. Over the next hour, Elena watched as Marco handled 3 more situations: a dispute between business partners, a request for security during a high-stakes meeting, and what appeared to be intelligence about a potential threat to one of their associates. In each case, Marco's approach was methodical, fair, and surprisingly diplomatic. "You're good at this," Elena observed during a quiet moment between meetings. "It's what I was born for," Marco replied. "My grandfather started this organization to protect our community when no one else would. My father expanded it, and now it's my responsibility to carry it forward." "What about what you want?" Elena asked. "Did you ever consider doing something else?" Marco's smile was rueful. "When I was younger, maybe. I thought about law school, actually. Ironic, considering where I ended up." "It's not that different," Elena said, surprising herself with the insight. "You're still solving problems and seeking justice. You're just operating outside the traditional system." "Is that how you see it?" Marco asked, his relief evident. "I see a man who takes responsibility for protecting people who have nowhere else to turn," Elena said honestly. "I see someone who has power and uses it to help rather than hurt. That's not what I expected when you told me about your family business." Marco set down his wine glass and moved toward Elena, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Elena Martinez, you continue to surprise me." "Good surprises, I hope," Elena replied, her heart racing at his proximity. "The best kind," Marco murmured, before kissing her with an intensity that made her forget where they were. When they broke apart, Tony was discreetly clearing his throat from the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention, Marco." Elena saw Marco's entire demeanor shift into high alert mode. "What kind of situation?" "The kind where having Elena here might not be ideal," Tony said carefully. Elena felt a spike of fear, but also determination. "I'm not going anywhere," she said before Marco could speak. "You said I needed to understand your world. This is part of it, isn't it?" Marco looked torn between protecting her and respecting her autonomy. "Elena, some situations are more volatile than others." "Then teach me how to handle it," Elena said firmly. "I'm not some fragile flower who needs to be hidden away every time things get difficult." After a moment of internal struggle, Marco nodded. "Stay behind me at all times. If I tell you to leave, you leave immediately. No questions asked." The situation turned out to be a potential confrontation with a rival organization that had been moving into territory traditionally controlled by Marco's family. Elena found herself in the back of a convoy of 3 cars, watching as Marco coordinated with his associates through earpieces and encrypted phones. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a parking garage, and Elena was surprised by how businesslike the entire exchange was. Marco and the other organization's representatives spoke for less than 10 minutes, reaching what appeared to be a mutually acceptable agreement about territorial boundaries. "That's it?" Elena asked as they drove away. "Most conflicts can be resolved through clear communication and mutual respect," Marco explained. "The key is making sure everyone understands the consequences of their choices before they make them." As the evening wound down, Elena found herself back in Marco's office, processing everything she had witnessed. "So this is really your life," she said. "Every day is like this?" "Some days are busier than others," Marco replied. "But yes, this is what I do. This is who I am. The question is whether you can accept it." Elena looked around the office, at the monitors and maps and the subtle signs of the power Marco wielded. She thought about her quiet life, her predictable routine, the safety of never taking risks or stepping outside her comfort zone. "I can accept it," she said finally, "but I have conditions." Marco raised an eyebrow. "Conditions? I want to know what's happening. Not every detail, but enough to understand when you're in danger or when I might be. I want to be useful, not just protected. And I want honesty between us, even when the truth is complicated." Marco studied her face for a long moment, then smiled. "I think I can agree to those terms. But Elena, once you're truly part of this world, there's no going back to who you were before. Are you absolutely sure?" Elena thought about the woman who had sat alone at her cousin's wedding just 3 days ago, nursing a flat glass of champagne and watching other people's happiness from a distance. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone who had been sleepwalking through life instead of truly living it. "I'm sure," she said. "Besides, I think that woman at the wedding was just waiting for someone to wake her up." Marco pulled her close, and Elena felt the rightness of the decision in every cell of her body. "Then welcome to my world, Elena Martinez. I promise you it's going to be anything but boring." As Elena kissed him back, she realized that sometimes the best decisions were the ones that terrified you. Sometimes love meant stepping into the unknown with someone who made you brave enough to become who you were meant to be. 6 months later, Elena would be running her own design studio with Marco's backing, creating marketing materials for the legitimate businesses in his network. A year later, she would be his equal partner in both business and life, using her analytical mind to help solve problems that required more subtlety than force. But that night in the warehouse office, she was simply a woman who had chosen adventure over safety, passion over predictability. As Marco held her close and the city lights twinkled beyond the windows, Elena knew she had finally found where she belonged, not sitting alone at the singles table, but standing beside the man who had seen her potential and given her the courage to claim it.